This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Can I welcome everyone to the Police and Crime Committee meeting. This morning we will be holding our monthly question and answer session with the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime. Please can you make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any interruptions. Can I now ask our clerk, Lauren Harvey, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chair. We've received no apologies this morning.
Thank you. And can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interests to declare?
Noted.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of November 2023 to be signed by me as a correct record?
Agreed.
And can we note the completed, outstanding and closed actions arising from previous meetings of the committee? So we now move on to our main item of business, and I would like to welcome our guests, Sophie Linden, Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, and Kenny Bowie, who is Director of Strategy and MPS Oversight and MOPAC, for MPS Oversight at MOPAC. So that brings us to the first questions. And Deputy Mayor, can you tell us what was the purpose and outcome of the London Policing Board's strategy afternoon held on the 2nd of November 2023, which was reported in your monthly update?
Of course. I mean, one of the things that we've, as we all know, the London Policing Board is relatively new in its, it's a new development. And one of the things I've been talking to the Deputy Mayor for Transport about, Seb Dance, is how do you make it, what are the things that you need to do to make a board effective? And we've also taken advice from other people as well. And one of those things is, of course, to build the individual members of the board into a board and to make sure that there is a strategy and a shared purpose and a shared understanding of the skills and expertise and experience of all members of the board. So we have, the strategy day in November is one that we will repeat, and it's one of the ways in which we're trying to develop the board and the whole of the board, including myself, into an effective board. So that was the purpose of the board strategy day. We did have a presentation from Baroness Louise Casey, so that members of the board could ask in more detail some of the, her conclusions, but also her thoughts. And we had, we discussed what the priorities would be for the board going forward. So that was what happened on the strategy day.
Thank you. And do you have, so you were talking about sort of developing the board, and that's sort of developing the board as a body and how you work together. But have you also got support for individual members as they kind of get, because presumably they have a variety of different backgrounds and experience in terms of understanding what's going on in policing?
Yes, of course. I mean, part of the strategy day and part of the way in which we are working is not just that strategy day. We are putting in deep dives, and we have briefings in advance of the board agenda items. So, for example, we had the strategy day in November, but in advance of the December the 6th meeting of the London Policing Board, because violence against women and girls was on the agenda, and obviously we have Andrea Simon, who is an absolute expert on violence against women and girls, because she leads the coalition and co-chairs the VOG board. We had a meeting to support members of the board increase and develop their understanding of violence against women and girls. So, for example, we invited Maggie Blythe, who is the leads for the NPCC and is now actually deputy at the College of Policing, to come and talk to them about, alongside our VOG team within MOPAC, talk to members of the board about what the national policing view is of violence against women and girls, but also to give them that experience. That's obviously as a whole board thinking of, how do you increase the knowledge, increase the strategic knowledge and the strategic understanding of members of the board. We have also offered we are offering all individuals the other, if they need further meetings around particular issues, to have those meetings. But we are also offering members of the board development, mentoring and coaching if that is what they want and need.
Thank you. So the latest report to the Police and Crime Committee from MOPAC states that you have also had one-to-one meetings with members of the London Policing Board. Have you met with every member, and do they have any reflections that you're able to share with us?
I have met, of course, I've met with every member. Again, that's part of the development of the board and the development of the ability of the board to be effective. I think it's really important for myself as Deputy Chair to understand, I was involved in the interviewing of the board members, but to really understand in depth what they are most interested in, what their experience and expertise is, and how they want to contribute to the board and where they want to focus. So that's why I have met each of them individually, and I'll continue to do so, because I think that's really important. I'm sure you do similar as chair of a committee. I think it's really important to do that going forward. What I have also discussed with them, obviously, is how the first meeting went, what they feel that they need in terms of development, but also what they've also asked me questions about my experience of oversight and my experience of challenging and supporting the Met. So that's why we have those one-to-one meetings, to make sure that we can ensure that members of the board are able to, and they are incredibly experienced and have a lot of expertise, are able to engage and to be as effective as possible.
Thank you. And presumably some of the experience of some of those members of the board will also be shaping the programme of the board as it goes forward.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, of course it is, and that's why we have those meetings. I'm not the only person who's meeting members of the board, and Kenny does a huge amount of work in terms of developing the board as well. I don't know if Kenny, if you want to say anything about what happens when from MOPAC officers as well.
Thanks, Sophie. No, obviously we do quite a lot just in terms of in the run-up to the meetings and in between the meetings, in terms of, as Sophie says, we pull together quite a lot of background packs for them, so that not only in our evidence and insights team can take them through not just what are the latest stats, what's the performance, where are the Met on particular issues, but also take them through what is the evidence base for stuff, what would a sensible logic model look like in terms of how any police force would take that sort of work forward. Where does the Met stand in context with other forces? Because sometimes I think there's a tendency just to look at the Met as a standalone entity and not understand that it's part of a wider sort of policing ecosystem as a whole. So we do a heck of a lot around that. Equally, when we have experts who are there who can talk to us about change management or can talk to us about how you drive cultural change, we use that to take that back and inform part of the wider oversight that we will do in terms of the Met, because obviously the two things aren't distinct, they're entirely complementary in that context. And then at the moment we are just working with them to understand what are the areas where not only can we help challenge the Met but also help support the Met. So if people have particular skills around finances or particular skills around cultural change or strategic workforce planning or risk and assurance or public affairs, there will be areas where in discussion with the Met, I'm sure that the Metropolitan Police would find some of those skills useful from their perspective as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Then my final question on this relates to the long-term funding to cover the costs of the London Policing Board. So the report on finance as at Q2 of this year, that we hear that MOPAC and the VRU are forecasting a year-end underspend of 0.4 million, and it said, and I quote, "This includes the proposed carry-forward of funds totalling 9 million to align spend to delivery and use of reserves totalling 0.3 million, the majority of which relates to the costs of the London Policing Board in 23-24, while a longer-term funding solution is identified." So what are you thinking about in terms of the longer-term funding solution, Sophie?
I'll pass over to Kenny in a minute, but in terms of that underspend being carried forward, the vast majority of that is about planned carry forward for services and commissioning, so that you have a long-term commissioning, which we've discussed, and I know I'll be asked about at the Budget and Performance Committee in January. But the long-term costs, in the budget for next year for the board, for servicing the London Policing Board is £0.4 million, and that's in the budget for next year. But Kenny, if you want to.
Yeah, so we've obviously just published recently our draft submission on this. We are having further internal discussions about it, but that's right, it's roughly somewhere in the region of 240,000 for the direct members, about 60,000 for some of the support and the wider services around it, and then we pay obviously for the GLA Secretariat through a shared service agreement, so it comes to roughly 400,000.
That's quite a lot of money, isn't it? It's well, I think it sounds like we're doing a slightly different job, but it does sound like a large sum of money.
So I've been questioned many times at this board about oversight. I've been questioned many times around, well, what was the oversight that MOPAC was doing? And I think we had agreement. Well, I think people agreed post-Casey, and actually we were looking at this before Casey, that we needed to look at the oversight and the challenge and support for the Met. You can't do that without costs. Now, the London Policing Board is part of that change in the step up in oversight of the Metropolitan Police, which I think Londoners wanted to see, and also, you know, Louise Casey's very clear in her report that the oversight needed to become more robust, and that is what this is about. The London Policing Board in itself sits at the top of the apex of oversight. If you want better and more robust oversight, and you want the expertise and experience that the London Policing Board brings in, it doesn't come with that. I think that is perfectly reasonable, and I already can feel the benefit of having those members of the board with that experience, you know, real experience bringing from the outside, whether that be community experience or experience of transformation. We've got real experts around transformation, or the experience of someone like Professor John Ashton, who is an absolute expert on statistics and data. One of the major things in the new Met for London is about the Metropolitan Police becoming a data-led organisation. If you want to bring these types, you know, get that type of vast array of experience, it's very good value for money.
And I won't. But yeah, I mean, the sort of the value for money is it kind of will be determined, I suppose, over time with the outcomes of the work of that scrutiny. So given we now know how much it's costing, how is it actually going to be reporting back so Londoners understand what difference that scrutiny from the policing board is making?
So I think that's a very good question in terms of, obviously there's the transparency and accountability that's built into the work of the London Policing Board, because the meetings of the board are held in public, as will the committees, the two committees that sit beneath it. They will be held in public. The transcripts will be published, obviously there'll be the minutes, and so that's part of it, but it's not the only one. It's one of the things that I have been discussing as to, well, we need to be able to show, because of the public money going in, what difference the London Policing Board is going to make to driving change and supporting change in the Metropolitan Police, and that's certainly something that we are, you know, it's only two meetings in, so we do not have that yet, but we can certainly, that is certainly something that we'll be factoring in about how do we communicate the effectiveness of the board and what the difference it has made. Ultimately, it will be part of making sure that the changes in the Met are being delivered, and you know, that's the ultimate way that you can see the effectiveness of the board, where there has been significant changes in the Met and the way in which they can drive that.
Do you have a sense of the timescale for kind of getting to a point where you would be able to tell us what that public communication would be?
Well, I think there is already we have already published the metrics that the London Policing Board will be holding the Metropolitan Police to account with, and you'll be able that, you know, those will be published on a quarterly basis, so you will already have some metrics to see whether there has been changes. In terms of the communications and the narrative around the London Policing Board, it's something that we will have to develop, and we'll be doing so probably and you know, don't hold me to this, but probably I would think on an annual basis, because that's something that, you know, it takes time sometimes to drive through, particularly as one of the major issues is around cultural change. We know that whilst you can make real differences, and it's already happening because of the work of the Commissioner, you can make huge strides in disciplinary and misconduct procedures, actual cultural change can take longer. So you have to balance what, you know, what you can report on, because there has been changes, and how long that takes.
Thank you. Assemblymember Pigeon.
Thank you. In your first answer to Assemblymember Russell, you said on this away day that you'd come up with priorities for the board. Can you tell us what those priorities are, please?
Yes, of course. I mean, they won't surprise you. The priorities around cultural reform, the MPS's approach to protecting women and children, which already the December the 6th meeting had that as an agenda item, rebuilding the MPS's relationship with Londoners, and also fixing the foundations. So those are categories. Obviously, overarching priority of the board is to make sure, and this is in their terms of reference, to make sure that the Metropolitan Police is delivering on the new Met for London plan and the Casey report, so that you know that's the overarching. But within that, those are at the moment the 4 key themes that they will be looking at.
So you've got 4 key themes. Then do you have objectives underneath those? And in your one-to-ones with members of the board, have you talked to them about their particular objectives for the year?
So with the metrics for the board have been published. They are corralled under less crime, more trust and higher standards, and there's very clear metrics within that. I'm sure I've got them if you want me to look at them and pick some of them out for you. In my one-to-ones with the board, so far, because it's only it's early days, we have discussed their expertise. As I've talked about their expertise and experience and where they want to focus, what committees they want to be on, where they feel they can add the most value, but also where I can also call on their expertise, and that has been extremely helpful already.
Okay, yesterday at Budget Committee, we were talking about all the functional bodies and the GLA budget, and it became clear that in terms of the MOPAC Met budget, they're going to expect, the officers who were before us thought that this new policing board is going to have to do some heavy lifting in terms of overseeing the budget, and particularly as there's a huge budget gap in the papers you put forward so far. Have you got any finance budget expertise on that board, and who's going to be leading that particular work?
So we do have finance expertise. Nick Campsey has a lot of expertise in finance, and he will be sitting on the data board, what's it called?
Finance Performance.
Sorry, I get it mixed up with the Budget Performance Committee. So he'll be leading on it. But of course, we've also got Carolyn Downs, who has run one of the London boroughs, so has significant experience in terms of finance and expertise. So those are two key people that we have on the board to do that.
Okay. And I need to look. I think I'll look at these metrics and then perhaps come back at a future meeting on some issues around that. Lovely, thank you, Chair.
I just wanted to come back. Sophie, you mentioned that the transcripts would be published of the policing board meetings. So far, we've only seen the minutes from the first meeting. Is it possible for are the transcripts going to be published?
They are, yeah. I think we've just said that in a response to a question as well. It's going to be from the 6th of December meeting onwards. We're going to be publishing them, so I think that's
really, really helpful, because I think it would help us with our scrutiny of the work of the policing board. So thank you. Thank you for that. Assembly Member Hall.
Just a quick one. Is there political balance on this board?
Yeah, it's all Labour.
To be honest, I have no idea. That was not a consideration that was not the consideration in terms of the appointments. They are not being appointed on a political basis. They've been appointed on the basis of experience and expertise. I've not asked any of them what their political views are.
But you would hope, I assume, that there is some political balance, would you? Or are you quite happy?
I presume there is political balance, but it's not been a basis of their appointments. They've been appointed on the basis of experience and expertise. They are not political appointments.
I hear what you say. Thank you.
Okay, so we're now going to move on to our next section, which is about how the Met is run. And Assembly Member Hall is going to start us off.
I am indeed. Deputy Mayor, do you agree with Baroness Casey's findings that the Met is run as a set of disconnected and competing moving parts?
So we've discussed many times about the recommendations and the findings of Baroness Casey's report, and we do accept the whole of the report. So, of course, we accept the findings in her chapter on how the Met is run.
So, can you explain to me that particular one that you agree with?
I'm sorry, what do you mean? Can I explain to you?
Give me an example then of how it's disconnected and competing.
Well,
parts.
if you read chapter 3, how the Met is run, she's very clear about you give me an example from your own experience. So from my own experience, I have through Oversight, I have seen the way in which the silo working of the Metropolitan Police and the management of the Metropolitan Police is run. So, for example, if you take an issue of children and how they are dealt with, it is not seen there. It has not been joined up in terms of custody, in terms of what happens on the street. That has not been joined up, and that's why in the Police and Crime Plan we had the commitment within there to develop a strategy, a child-first strategy, and it is also a commitment in the new Met for London to have a child-centred, child-first approach of the Metropolitan Police to policing, so that approach is joined up right across the piece in the Metropolitan Police.
Okay, so is that a recent thing that it's been disjointed or siloed?
I think it's been an issue, a long-running issue about it being disjointed and siloed. I think everybody that's worked with the Metropolitan Police for a long time, it's one of the challenges that they have had for a long time in terms of joining that up and having that. One of the issues, I mean, one of the things about being disjointed and siloed is whether you've got a good, and you may well come on to this, whether you've got a very good governance structure that is able to show that golden thread from the top to the bottom of the organisation. Now, we know and have been looking at this for a long time, as has the audit panel, that governance structure was disjointed, that there was not the proper join-up. If you take the Mayor's Action Plan for on trust and confidence that we published in 2020, one of the considerable, well, we had many discussions with the then leadership of the Metropolitan Police as to how that governance would be joined up. It's another example of how I knew that that was a silo working, because when you ask, for example, where was stop and search, the governance of stop and search being, where was that? The answer would be in 4 or 5 different places, so you could see how it's disjointed.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, because you have been in position 7.5 years, so if you saw how it was at the beginning, which clearly you did, it's a shame it took Baroness Casey to push things along more than before and to try and get things moving.
So I think, you can take chapter at a time for Baroness Casey's report, and I think that's what you're doing, which is, a good way of deep diving into the issues. But I do also think you need to take a strategic look at the whole of Baroness Casey's report, and she's very clear in a different section of the report about the governance, oversight and inspection of the Metropolitan Police, that all of which, including the IOPC, including HMIC, FRS and MOPAC, that we lacked the powers and the levers to drive change. She's very clear about that, and that's, we've discussed that previously at this committee many times, and she's clear about that. So one of the things that we have done since the publication of the report is to convene a meeting of the IOPC, College of Policing and HMIC FRS in order to be able to ensure that we are more joined up ourselves, and that we the scrutiny and the driving forward of change in the Metropolitan Police is, more than the sum of its parts, and that is one of the key things for me that's come out of the Baroness Casey report. And we've discussed before what has MOPAC taken from the report. One of the things I've taken from the report in regards to our role in MOPAC. But Kenny, do you want to say more?
Yeah. So all I would say is I don't think it's a problem unique to the Metropolitan Police, an organisation of that size, having many silos. I was in the Home Office for a long time, and I can assure you it was, broadly speaking, the same accusations were levelled at us.
You shouldn't compare bad apples with bad apples.
Well, I'm saying it's often as you get into sort of those larger size organisations, it is a trait of those organisations that fiefdoms arise. I mean, a specific example would be if you looked at Child Q. Within that, it was viewed very much by the Met as being simply a problem which was for frontline policing in the way that had occurred, and that there wouldn't be a problem within custody. We did ask about the custody, was told it would be fine, and then actually it turned out there was problems across the piece. And I do think that is something which we have been raising certainly since I joined, and Sophie has been hot on, which is how does organisational learning within the Metropolitan Police not just work in a vertical sense up and down that silo, but in a horizontal sense across the piece as well. And I think that is a key challenge for organisations, taking the strategic learning from an issue and making that go across the piece, and that is something which has been raised continuously. I also think another point in here is actually around having a proper, what I would call, assurance function within the Metropolitan Police, so that actually Mark and Linden, they are now doing this, but historically there has not been a robust assurance function. And if you look at what the Directorate for Audit, Risk and Assurance would say as well, they have said that. That's why a number of points in Louise's report said that hadn't been picked up. But if they could grow that, because the question is, Mark needs to be able to assure himself, obviously, before he can assure us in these things. And I think that sort of stuff would also provide a mechanism for avoiding those silos and making sure that this stuff did work horizontally.
Okay. Deputy Mayor, do you think the Commissioner has got a grip of what's happening now inside the Met?
I think he has, yes. I think he's got, one of the significant step changes since he has arrived is that, really trying to pull together the performance, the way in which the Met is managed, and making sure that it's seen as a coherent whole. Yes, I do think that is, absolutely. You can see that, you can feel it. It's not an easy task. I'm not saying it's a done deal, but it's absolutely, he is getting a grip and is making a difference in the way in which the Met is managed.
Okay, give us a very quick thing of something to support that comment.
Can I just hand over to Kenny? Well, it's the task. Well, it's the task.
No, I'm
okay,
asking
it's the task. The way in which.
No, in your view, you've just given me an answer,
and I'm just trying to give you. If you didn't interrupt
you must be confident with that, and I'm really pleased about that. So, from your view, you're the deputy mayor,
and I'm about to give you an answer if you let me speak.
Good. No, that's good. I want the answer from you. Good.
But I am the one. Okay, of course. So the way in which performance tasking is taking place in the Metropolitan Police, there is Alexis Boom sits at the top of that with his, in terms of looking at performance, and it's a golden thread down to the local BCUs and the local priority setting and tasking of the Metropolitan Police. It's something that we've discussed on many occasions. You could not feel that before. You can feel that now.
So it's more a feeling than evidence.
No, sorry, apologies. I can see the evidence, so I can understand where how the tasking and prioritisation...
Give me a very little, give us a little bit of just something that you've noticed that's different, that will start to give us confidence that is indeed the case.
So another example would be the way in which, and I know you're going to come on to this now, but the way in which the protests are being managed at the moment by the Metropolitan Police. There is a real, there is a grip centrally on the way in which those protests are being managed, so that they understand this pressure and the burden on the BCUs and the frontline policing, so they can understand who has been moved from where and what that impact is, and they can see and are also keeping keeping oversight on and management of, for example, the emergency response. It isn't that they've moving everybody to make sure that they can do the protest. They've got a real grip on how, and this is about really understanding the whole of the organisation. They've got a grip on understanding how moving those officers locally can have and might have an impact from the local to the central, might have an impact on emergency responses. When I ask them, and I didn't used to get this as a quick answer, when I now ask them what impact has this had locally on the protest, they can tell me immediately what the emergency response times are and how things are holding up locally.
Well, are you telling me then, up until now, that hasn't happened? Are you actually telling me that putting that many officers in the centre of London, taking them, as we all know, from different parts of London, nobody knew the impact that was having? Are you actually telling me that?
No, what I'm saying is there is a far better grip on the Metropolitan Police as an organisation that understands the pressure and the burden of the protest. As an example, it's very clear from Baroness Casey's report, as you have said, that there hasn't been that real look at the organisation.
I'm just taking what you've given me as an answer, and I'm somewhat concerned that up until then you're saying that there wasn't a grip. But I'll move on because
it's an interesting conundrum, isn't it? To be asked to give an example of what has changed, and then to say, oh, well, therefore, did you not know that that wasn't happening?
Yeah, but that's our job.
Either things have changed or they haven't.
That is our job. If you're saying that the police did not know, it's our job. If you're saying that the police did not know that before, then that would send alarm bells to those of us that have been scrutinising the police for quite some time.
So no, what I said was that there was a far better grip and a far speedier and grip of that. Not that they didn't absolutely know it, but that the senior leadership of the Met, for me, it is that they have a much better grip. As an example.
Okay. In what ways do you believe? And this is to you, Sophie, again.
Wasn't that Assembly member?
Oh, do I have to stop? Oh, I'm so sorry. I'll pass over to you then. But before I
pass to Assembly member Bailey, we've got Assembly member Ahmed to come in on the back of question 5.
Okay. All right.
Assembly member Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, panel. Commissioner Rowley has said that more officers are leaving the Met than are being recruited. What's been done to retain officers with crucial organisational experience? And I know, Kenny, you spoke a few minutes ago about some of the experience that's needed, but what's been done to retain what we already have?
So one of the levers that the Commissioner pulled in order to try to retain officers was actually looking at the way in which they were paid, and he has increased the London allowance. He made that announcement a few months ago in terms of increasing the London allowance so that officers, especially in the cost of living crisis, that was one of the things that they are putting in place. The other thing which is within New Met for London, and it's under the banner of fixing the foundations, is about giving officers the right equipment for what they need to do their duties. So if you talk to the Commissioner about, this is about retaining them as well, because it's about, in order to retain officers, of course you need to be doing all you can to pay them in the right way, but you also need to make sure that they feel valued. And one of the things that the Commissioner has had feedback from the front line, for example, is that they don't have the right equipment, the right coats. So he's putting together a rollout of laptops, he's looking at uniform, and that's about retention, isn't it? Because I think staff, officers or staff, or in any organisation, they stay if they feel valued, and they stay if they're getting the right pay.
Do we have any feedback as to whether that is working?
I haven't seen the staff survey yet. I don't know if you have, Kenny.
So that it will be the staff survey which will give us a sense of that, their sense of pride in the organisation, belonging. Those are generally, I think, the top metrics. I'll come back to if that's incorrect. They will take a bit of time to seep through, as with all issues. The other factor which I would say, which has been a sort of perennial issue raised by officers, is the lack of professional development which has been received, and again what that means in terms of feeling of value. I think Mark has talked about his Leadership Academy, getting more training in for people. The Mayor obviously invested a quite hefty sum in that for this financial year. So hopefully the combination of all those things will see people retained. The Met also do exit interviews where people are willing to do that and try and take the learning from that and how they feed that back into what's going on. And I would just sort of say the question of retention can't be separated out, in my view, from the overall question of cultural reform of the Met. Because if you make the Met anti-discriminatory organisation, if you make it an inclusive organisation, that evidence would suggest is much more likely to boost your retention and make sure that the training of recruits as they come in and a realistic picture is painted of what the job is going to be like, will help with your retention again, so that people arrive with realistic expectations.
So moving on from retention to actual recruitment itself. So
I think you're moving into other...
Oh, my apologies.
Be a follow-up on, has the Commissioner got a grip of what's happening inside the Met, and what evidence do you have to support it?
Well, recruitment and retention is about group.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, I'll leave it there.
So I think maybe your supplementary was put against the wrong question, maybe. Yeah. Assembly Member Duval, did you want to come in briefly?
On the grip question and one of those issues, and I have raised this issue of not so much about retention, about the crisis in officers, the number of officers we have in different sections. I've raised it with the Mayor at Mayor's Question Time. I've raised it with the Commissioner twice. I think it's been now 2-3 months. So in listening carefully to your earlier answers around numbers, I think we got to the last point where the Commissioner had said, yeah, he recognised there was a problem. So in recognising there's a problem, are you now receiving regular reports on the numbers that we have in various sections, BCUs of the Metropolitan Police around that we avoid the crisis that we would have had in the past of where that's affected performance? So what emergency measures are you receiving or information about that before it becomes a bigger issue?
So we're receiving regular information in terms of the prioritisation of where they are moving officers. So, for example, there is the there is the target to move, I think it's 500 officers into the public protection units. We receive regular information about how that is going. It is going very slowly. We see that in the reports from the Commissioner reports to the London Policing Board. He's very clear about that. Also receive regular feedback as to I think it's also one of the issues that you're talking about is not just not just where the officers are going and how quickly that is, but is there a prioritisation of the front line rather than the prioritisation of the specialist OCUs? Certainly, as receiving information as to how that is working, the Commissioner is taking difficult decisions to move people, and that is, it is difficult, it takes time, but we receive regular reports as to looking at how does that work. We are also, for me, asking for regular reports around, so for example, it's in the Casey report, it's a national thing about prioritisation against violence against women and girls. Show me in your capacity and resources how that has shifted. That is something that I have asked for and we are going to be receiving.
So we shouldn't be seeing any, in a year's time, adverse performance issues based on numbers of police officers because we haven't got enough in the right sections. That's being managed by the professionals. But this is where I think the value of MOPAC comes into it. You're giving that third eye of saying to the professionals, you need to watch this because history has told us, we can think of the Child Abuse Command, where we don't have the right number of officers, that performance dips.
So I can't, in a year's time, will every unit that should be prioritised be up to strength? We would hope so, but I cannot, it's not a guarantee because we also know, and it sounds like you're going to come on to it, the Met is having difficulty recruiting. So in terms of officer, the establishment that they need to recruit to, they're not getting all the they're not getting the pipeline through and they're not getting the people through. So, there still may well be gaps. However, what I would expect in a year's time is to be for you and for me and the London Policing Board to see very clearly how that prioritisation is about the front line and has shifted and has dealt with the issues in the Casey report about the front line being diminished whilst the specialist units had the highest supervisory ratios, for example, and had were getting more of the resources into them and more quickly. So that's what I would expect to see. But in terms of the recruitment, we may well be in a position where we are still got some of the units not fully staffed because of the recruitment. We're not getting the people through. But it's also aligned to the piece of work which I know both the Commissioner and the Deputy Commissioner have discussed with you, which is about their looking at what they call it was 8,000 officers who are not on full duties, some of which are just not deployable at all, but those officers that are deployable that at the moment not on full duties, working through that very, very rapidly to make sure that they can go back out onto full duties and into the front line where that's feasible, where that's possible. Of course, many of those officers are officers who are ill, have been injured and are quite rightly not on full duty, so it will never be everybody there. And then some of those officers are also the officers that have been suspended.
Thank you. We now move on to Assembly Member Bailey, and just going forward, I'm only going to take supplementaries at the end of a section because I think there's a real danger of straying into other people's questions. So if you've got a supplementary booked in halfway through a section, it'll be moved to the end of the section. Assembly Member Bailey.
Morning, panel. Hope you're doing well. Listen, I'll address this to Deputy Mayor. How are you? In what ways do you believe the Met's new corporate governance structure will drive greater accountability and better decision-making? I'll ask for a couple of examples as well. And just to add something to that, you in one of your previous answers, you talked about MOPAC, etc., not having the powers to drive change in the Met. Do you have any additional powers since the Casey report was published?
So no, there's no additional power since the Casey report was published. In terms of the new governance model, I mean, I know you'll be absolutely aware that new governance model is an operational decision for the Commissioner, and it's his management. It's his management and governance model. Clearly, we have a view of it, as does the audit panel. We've already talked about the audit panel having a view of the governance within the Met. In terms of how it should drive change and be a good governance, I mean, I presume you've got it in front of you in terms of the decision. If you take the decision making around for example, the finances, the new EXCO boards are going to drive to ensure that the Commissioner who's chairing them has real, has got that grip, understanding and real ability to question and to ensure that any financial decisions and decisions to invest are being taken with strategically across the Met, and really with that real understanding from the Commissioner and his senior leadership team. MOPAC sits on one of those EXCO boards, and there was one of those boards this week around and I have that fed back to me in terms of the quality of the discussions and the fact that not every paper just gets signed off, and it doesn't just automatically get signed off, but often has to come back because it makes the decision making better and there is proper accountability there.
I want to go back to this thing of new powers and add it to culture, because technically, if I take your answer as you said it, there's no additional power, and you couldn't drive change then, so that means you shouldn't be able to drive change now. You would argue, and many would, that there's plenty of change going on. So are you confident that this change will continue in view of the fact that you don't have any new powers, and you suggested beforehand that the powers would have been useful?
Apologies. So the Baroness Casey talks about powers and levers. She also talks about the attitude from the Metropolitan Police around, and we've heard, I know actually this Police and Crime Committee, I remember on many occasions talking to the former Deputy Commissioner about defensiveness, because that came out in other reports, and ability and transparency and accountability. I'm really confident that there has been a step change in terms of that openness, transparency and ability to engage with MOPAC because of the change in leadership at the top of the Metropolitan Police. But also, whilst I have that confidence, the London Policing Board and the way in which MOPAC is servicing it and the way in which the expertise and experience of the members is going to be used, there's transparency and accountability there. It's all part of the picture of driving forward change.
So has this led to changes in MOPAC then? Because one could argue that MOPAC could have asked for some of or all of these changes prior to the Baroness Casey report and didn't. So is something significant happened at MOPAC in your governance structure, in your culture, to help you drive change for the Met?
So I would not agree with you that MOPAC was not asking for changes within the Metropolitan Police before Casey. I think it's because of the lack of progress, actually, that the Mayor asked the former Commissioner to commission Baroness Casey to do the report, because we got to the end of where we were just like, there has not been enough change, there has not been enough progress in the things that we are asking for. I know you're going to come on to child protection, but so for example, child protection is one of those areas that there had not been significant enough change. Baroness Casey points it out as well in terms of children, and because they're still not satisfied in terms of change, we asked the Inspectorate to come in and inspect because on child criminal and sexual exploitation. But in terms of some very key work that MOPAC has undertaken in years gone by, so for example misconduct, Baroness Casey also reported on this. 2 reports from MOPAC about disproportionality and misconduct, both of which showed that there was significant disproportionality for the people entering into the misconduct system. There hadn't been enough significant change. Baroness Casey also points that out. We are still pursuing that, and there is significant work being undertaken within the Metropolitan Police about that at the moment.
So you're saying your way of driving change was commissioning a report, bring these things to light?
No, I'm saying that's one of the ways in which you can drive change. So one of the ways, obviously, if you in my position or MOPAC's position wants to drive change, you can. We have the oversight boards, regular quarterly oversight boards. I had my bilateral meetings. MOPAC officers sit on numerous boards within the Metropolitan Police. People and Culture Board, Data Board, and so that is also one around scrutiny, but also 2 about supporting for change. There is a number of ways in which you can do that. I think those reports where there are significant concerns, having the evidence to show what the problem is, the extent of the problem, should make it better and make the change more possible, because you're very clear about the evidence of what is going on. It isn't enough to go, we think there's a problem here. You have to show that there's a problem, and you have to show where it is and what is happening.
Okay. How is MOPAC working with the Met's new non-executive directors to provide oversight and scrutiny for the Met?
So there's now 3 non-executive directors of the Metropolitan Police. There used to be 2. I had meetings with the previous, but not the previous, we've still got Pippa Wicks, but Paul Clee has stood down because he's gone off onto a different job. Meetings with them, and I've got meetings with the new NEDs non-executive directors in the diary for January. We have also, in terms of MOPAC officers, so for example, the Chief Finance Officer sat on, I think it was a shortlisting or a interview panel, I think it might have been shortlisting panel for a role within the Metropolitan Police that the non-executive directors were also supporting the Met on. So there is that joint work happening.
Okay, and are these NEDs across the whole piece? Or do they have a particular focus?
Well, they are the Metropolitan Police's non-executive directors, but Kenny, I can't remember what their focuses are.
Oh, to give you one specific example, Mr. Bailey. So, Pippa Wicks chairs the Audit, Risk and Assurance Committee now, the first of which... Pippa Wicks chairs the Audit, Risk and Assurance Committee within the Metropolitan Police, and I sit on that. So that happened for the first time with her in the chair last month, and I would say that was a very positive development that Mark and Lynn have brought about. It's definitely a very different approach to the way of chairing, and I think that will bring real benefits to how the Met's going to sort of be run as a result of that.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick wrap up in this little section before I move on to Deputy Mayor. There's no doubt there's a lot of activity going on. There's umpteen different boards, there's NEDs, there's all sorts of stuff, there's police, whatever they call the other board. Is there too much? Is this another whole... Do we need another deputy commissioner as well to look at all of these boards and collate all this information? Is there too much going on? Is it helpful? Because there's a point where there's too much scrutiny, and also how much cross relationships are there? Do people sit on multiple of these boards? How many people sit on more than one of these boards in your purview?
So there is a lot going on. The Metropolitan, I don't mean this, I genuinely don't mean this flippantly, but the Metropolitan Police is a huge organisation. So I don't think, in terms of the governance structure, I think you have to have a governance structure like that and the scrutiny like that, because it is such a large organisation, and you can see from the topics that you've covered in the Police and Crime Committee, you've got the child protection, you've got the public protection, you've got violence against women and girls, and you could go on, and then you have all the specialist units of the Met. So if you were thinking of this as being a single organisation with just one single, much smaller way in which it operates, yes, I would say that there was too many boards, etc. However, these boards, you have to have a risk and insurance board. You've got to have an investment board, and of course you then need, and the Commissioner needs to assure himself, and then we need to be assured about. Sounds like a never-ending circle, doesn't it? Yes. Assured of the assurance. So I think we should always keep it under the review, and the audit panel does keep it under review in terms of the governance, to make sure that there isn't that duplication, and to make sure that they understand, and do they understand where that governance is. I don't think they have got it quite right yet in terms of some of the ways in which things are still being managed and governed. There's still some way to go. So, for example, at the Disproportionality Board that I co-chair, I asked the question again about stop and search, around where is that governed and where are those things happening. It's still not completely, there's still work to be done in tying that together. So there is, yes, I think it has improved, but I think there is still work to be done.
I think it'd be interesting to see the organisational chart of this. I'm sure it has lots of levels on it. And I make a plea about silos, because the more complicated this thing becomes, this governance structure becomes, the more likely we are to find silos. And I would just like someone to bear that in mind as you progress and this develops. Let me just finish with this. How did MOPAC work with the Met to develop its new strategic workforce plan? Has it now been finalised, and what are your reflections on the plan so far?
So no, it's not been finalised. We are working with the Met on that on a number of ways, and I'll bring Kenny in terms of the officer, how the officers are working on that. We are developing a work programme for the London Policing Board. The workforce strategy, of course, will be part of that work programme, because it's such an important part of what Baroness Casey report said. I have regular meetings with Claire Davies, and talk to her about the workforce strategy, as I do with also the Deputy Commissioner. So there are a number of ways in which we are supporting and challenging the Metropolitan Police around that workforce strategy and the importance of that workforce strategy, being able to align where that, and it's what Ellen Duval's been talking about. How do you align where officers are and where the demand is? And that is a piece of work that we are scrutinising and challenging as the Met develop it. But Kenny, if you want to.
So that work is led by our head of MPS Oversight for Workforce and Professionalism within MOPAC, who links in with her counterparts within the Metropolitan Police. We understand that a draft is currently being developed, and once that is fully developed, then we'll obviously get a chance to speak to them and feed in on all of that. But we also sit on various internal, I suppose you could call it, Metropolitan Police issues, such as the sort of HR performance forum, vetting oversight group, all things which will actually feed into what they actually need to do in terms of...
Can I just interrupt you there?
Yeah, of course.
Is one of these groups around recruitment? Because does the Met have a recruitment issue?
The Met does have a recruitment issue. That would be picked up at the HR performance. They would look at where recruitment's got to in that forum, I understand it.
Okay. Is there anything else, Deputy Mayor, before I move on? Okay, I think that's back to you, Chair. Thank you, both.
Thank you all. So I've now got Assembly Member Pidgeon, Assembly Member Hall and Assembly Member Ahmed with supplementaries. If we can try and keep the supplementaries quite tight, because we're at the limit of our time.
I was keen to find out more about the non-executive directors in the Met. You say they've now appointed 3 of them. Do you have details of their kind? It wouldn't be a job description of stuff, but their areas of focus, the hours that they are doing each week or month, and are they able to have more influence over the Met because they're sitting there at the board meetings compared to where you're able to influence because you're from outside? We're talking about where that power is. Are they able to get the change that's needed?
I don't have details of their job descriptions or their areas of expertise, although obviously Kenny has talked a bit about Pippa Wicks and what she is doing, but I'm sure the Met... Have you got that? Okay, brilliant.
Yeah, so, I mean, Pippa is basically, she's a businesswoman, former executive director at John Lewis, real expert in change management and culture. I believe Lord Brian Paddock, I'm sure you're all very familiar with.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say as an ex-assistant commissioner, he brings a lot of expertise in policing, interface with politics now and everything. And you have Rebecca George, who was in 2020 president of the British Computer Society, who obviously will bring a lot of expertise in digital transformation, especially in leadership and culture. Now, I don't have the detail of how that's being brought together and how specifically the Met want to use them in the long term, but those are the areas of expertise. As to will they be able to drive the change as opposed to us, I mean, we have very different roles. I mean, obviously we both want the same outcome, which is, I suppose, an improved Met, providing a better service for Londoners overall, but their job on that board is to sit there and advise Mark and his senior management team on the running of the Met on a day-to-day basis. Our job obviously is to oversee them and ensure an efficient, effective delivery of the Metropolitan Police and that it's achieving value for money.
I think it'd be useful for us to get that information. I realise we don't have the Met here today, otherwise I would be asking the Met, but I think it would be really helpful for us to see that because I think they have a crucial role and could actually help with some of the change that's needed. Thank you, Chair.
So just one last thing on that. I mean, I think it's similar really to the way in which we are convening the IOPC, HMRC, FRS and College of Policing to combine all our knowledge in challenging and supporting the Met. Again, with the non-executive directors, one of the things we are going to put in place is a joint meeting with the non-executive directors, the Commissioner, the Deputy Commissioner and myself and MOPAC, so that we can combine that and we have a real understanding. So it's not in silo. The work is not being undertaken in silos as well. I think that's really important for us to acknowledge that we need to be doing something differently as well.
No, I think it's really, really good. And actually, when I read to one of the people who've been appointed, their expertise in change management is exactly what I have been pushing the Mayor and the Commissioner on. You need to get external people from outside policing who get this and can help advise, and I think it looks a really welcome appointment.
I couldn't agree with you more, and it's in Louise Casey's report as well, that you need to get people to do the doing, not just the advising. And actually you can see, and I can see that already in the Metropolitan Police, where CC has brought in outside expertise, and the performance and the grip has significantly changed, and is a real, I think it's an example of good practice. Really good officers as well doing a really good job, but they've brought in outside expertise to do that.
Understanding what good looks like in the real world, not just in the policing world, because you compare yourself, well, we're doing well against other forces. Well, actually, that's not good enough in the outside real world. So I think it's really important. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Hall.
Right, I'll be really quick, Chair. Can you just tell me what's happening to the estate strategy?
We are...
It's like an AOB, isn't it, on the end of every single meeting? Instead of that, what's happened to the estate strategy?
I think on this we are at one, Susan.
I think we are. Let's rejoice. Yes, it's the season of goodwill. Here we go. This is it. It's the estate strategy. Yeah.
We are still waiting for the estate strategy. One of the things is, we've talked about it a lot. We're still waiting for it. They're still working through. One of the things they're working through, what came to EXCO, was not agreed, is the working from home policy, because there were questions still from the Commissioner. That's really good. That's not a criticism. It's good that they're actually being properly scrutinised. So we are still waiting for it. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I mean, because obviously I'm concerned so many officers are having to have their kit, charged up miles away from where they're supposed to be working on the wards, and it really bothers me, because it's really difficult for many of those frontline officers. So if I just give you some bits could you send me the answers to these, because this is important for me. How many police stations are open? How many police stations are used just as a base and not open to the public? How many stations have been sold? And if I can have those details, and how many stations are being sold? If you could write to me and give me that. Only when I put in questions, it takes a month of Sundays to get answers back.
We can give you the figures for how many police buildings.
Buildings.
Because police stations are front counters to me, and there is one 24-hour police front counter in every borough. But actually, because the estate strategy is being reviewed, the disposals, the selling of police buildings has been put on hold. But we can come back to you with how many police buildings have been sold.
I'd be grateful, because I've been showing patience with this, which is unlike me, and it's now getting to such a stage. I can't wait for the strategy. I want to know that information. So if I could have that as a matter of urgency, I'd be very, very grateful. Thank you.
Assemblymember Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair, and my apologies for the earlier confusion, and apologies to Assemblymember Bailey for stepping on his toes about recruitment and the workforce plan. You spoke earlier about the workforce plan still being in a draft. I'm making an assumption, but there is a really, there's a big issue here. Casey talked about 48% of officers, only 48% living in London. What's been done further to encourage recruitment of officers from London to the Met?
So I think we're all we've talked about the issue about the Met not being able to recruit to target. And because of that, the London residency requirement has been lifted, and Louise Casey talks about that as a disappointment. The Commissioner's talked about it as disappointing, and of course, myself and the Mayor, we would like it to only recruit from London residents, but we can't, because we have to be able to get the officers through. However, that doesn't mean there isn't a real focus in trying to encourage Londoners to apply for the Met. So in fact, the Mayor has invested in the engagement police outreach team for the Metropolitan Police that go out into communities to encourage people to recruit. So there's a lot of work locally to try to, one, flag that the Met is recruiting, and two, to encourage all diverse communities to apply to the Metropolitan Police. There is a specific outreach team within the Metropolitan Police to do that.
How effective is that? Is it working?
We are looking at how effective that has been, and to see whether you can see a correlation between where they have been and have we got the. And we're waiting. I don't think we've got the. Have we got nearly done? It's nearly done. Looking at that effectiveness, we're waiting to see how effective that is. But clearly, we've we've been very, very upfront and transparent about. There is an issue about being able to recruit. I think that is also about the labour market in London, not just about well, it is about the labour market in London. So.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we are going to move to our next section, which is looking at firearms, and Assembly Member Prince is going to start us off.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Sophie. Season's greetings. In what way has the London Policing Board considered bringing firearms into the work programme?
Again, the development of the work programme is, we are developing the work programme, and the firearms, obviously the firearms review and the firearms command is a significant issue. It had a whole, Baroness Casey very much focused on it, and she focused on it quite rightly, and the issues around David Carrick and Wayne Couzens, it will be in the work plan.
Board.
For the board, yes.
Lovely, okay. And can you tell me what expert advice does the London Policing Board bring on this issue? How can they advise the Met? Do they have any experts in firearms policing? Yeah.
So I don't think the issue is needing expertise in firearms itself, because I think actually the Metropolitan Police is probably a
firearms policing.
Yeah, no, firearms. But in terms of the issues around firearms policing, was about culture and management. Susan Lee, who sits on the board, is an expert in cultural change and transformation. So she will be, she will be a person who can give the, in terms of her role on the London Policing Board, she's the person who has that expert, as well as Carolyn Downs, change, transformation, but there is a very, significant expertise within Susan Lee.
Thank you. Okay, I think I'll leave it there, actually.
Thank you very much. I've got Assembly Member Devenish is going to ask the next question, and then I'll bring in supplementaries. I've got you on the list for that, Umesh. Assembly Member Devenish.
Good morning, Deputy Mayor. What level of engagement has MOPAC had with the Home Office review of, and I quote, investigatory arrangements which follow the police use of force and police driving related incidents, please?
We've had, in fact, Kenny is the person that's done the engagement, so it's probably best placed to answer this, but we have had engagement in terms of the review, really clear messages about the review being very important, that not only should it have the confidence of the firearms officers, but also the confidence of Londoners and London's communities, and we have engaged with the Home Office around that. So I don't know, Kenny, if you want to say a bit more.
I mean, I think that's a fair summary of where we're at. They're moving at great pace on this. It is genuinely a very difficult issue, to be honest with you, with sort of strong feelings on both sides of it. It goes into the sort of wider question about reform of the misconduct system, I would say. So it's not something which should be viewed in, as we talked about earlier, in a silo. It does need to be viewed in the wider sense of things, and certainly I think one of the key issues which comes out of this, regardless of whether we move to a civil test, a criminal test, IOPC moving away from Galbraith test to open stuff or whatever, is actually about the timeliness and the speed with which this sort of stuff goes. Because if there is an issue, it's only right that whether or not there's an issue, it's only right that justice is done quickly, because if that officer is somebody who should not be in the force, they should be got rid of quickly, and that's right. If the officer is somebody who hasn't acted improperly, it's absolutely no use to the Commissioner or the Deputy Commissioner or Londoners for that officer not to be out there working. And I think that is an absolutely key issue which does need to be looked at in this. The problem, I would say, for the IOP seeing this in their defence is that they are a demand-led organisation in many cases, and I think sometimes that demand-led does need to be looked at in terms of what happens with the wider sort of Home Office funding envelope. I think the draft settlement's due out today, so we can see what's going on, but I think that has to be considered part and parcel of the wider the wider issue here and the wider misconduct system as a whole.
And Deputy Mayor, do you agree with the Home Office review terms of reference, and does it go far enough in your view?
So the terms of reference do talk about this issue about having the confidence of communities. So it might not be those words, but they do talk about engagement with communities. I think the proof's going to be whether they have actually engaged communities and the way in which they have done that, and what they come out with. We're waiting to see that. I do have some concerns, because I'm sure you've all had experience of this as well, is that if you really want to engage communities, it takes time, and that this is a very rushed review. They wanted to get it done and dusted. I think it was it announced in October, done and dusted by Christmas? So it may be in the terms of reference, but actually how significant or deep that engagement has been and how that will really work, I would be very concerned about.
That actually was my final question. So you haven't got any more detail in terms of how communities will be involved in this?
No, we've offered Kenny has given our advice and support around that, but we haven't. I don't know what's happened apart from for us as a consequence of that.
I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Pigeon.
Yes, thank you. In terms of firearms, the training centre was mentioned heavily in Baroness Casey's report. I've been down there several times over the years, and the staff who work there are former Met officers. And clearly I felt there was a lot of criticism around there. What changes have taken place at the training centre since the Casey report, and what more can we see to make sure that we can have full confidence in the training centre and how it's set up?
So I'll need to write to you with more specifics, but I think that there is new management in place at the training centre. I'll need to come back and confirm, because this is sort of me trying to recall from the dark recesses of my mind, which is never a great thing to do in front of all of you. But I think that's right. The overall programme around firearms reform, which was previously being jointly headed by Matt Jukes and Matt Twist, is now going to be headed up by Pippa Mills, who is leading overall in the cultural reform, and she will be taking that forward. I think that is always going to be a bit of not an issue per se, but because the people who are going to be experts very often in police firearms issues are going to be ex-police firearms people. So that, I suspect, that will be one of the issues which will need to be looked at as they look at this reform issue overall. Because, I mean, you are right to put your finger on that, but there is not a sort of easy solution to that question, I suspect.
Baroness Casey was very critical
I
about
agree.
The culture there, and how it's a powerful thing. I can give you your licence, or I can take it away, and it felt a real imbalance of power. And just reading what she had put, it's a very macho culture down there. It's a very strange place. So I'm just wondering what's being done to change that.
So I'll need to come back to this. I mean, I think our culture about the sort of that was more within the actual realms of the team, rather than in terms of being able to run the seniors, etc. And I totally take the point that you're making more generally about the culture, and that obviously we agree with the point Baroness Casey's made. I wasn't seeking to dispute that at all. I'm merely making the point that I suppose the pool of candidates from which one might fish is never going to be as large as one might wish to see it, if I can put it that way.
So it's the supervision and management. Well, I look forward to more detail in writing. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you. In June, I asked a written question on the number of authorised firearms officers in the Met, and was provided with data that showed a 9% reduction as of April 2023. So why has this number fallen, and also has it fallen further?
I'll have to get back to you on whether it has fallen further and the reasons for that reduction. There has always been an issue about recruiting into firearms. It's a difficult job, and that has always been an issue. And then there's also the aligned issue about recruiting more diverse candidates into firearms. That has always been an issue. The question for me is whether that 9% drop, whether that's was reduced further. The question is whether it can keep up with the demand that is needed as well, and the capacity. So I'll have to get back to you on that.
Yeah, it is an exceptionally difficult job, and you know, we need these firearms officers. I support them completely. I asked for follow-up questions for more up-to-date data in October. The Met are now refusing the answer on security ground, which worried me. Yet previously they have provided it. So would you be kind and look into that for me? If it has to be told to me privately for a reason then I understand, and you know full well I will keep that private, but I am concerned about this. Following the firearms walkout in September, what plans are in place if that's repeated?
So the plans, I mean, we obviously had those discussions with the Commissioner when we were waiting for the outcome of the legal process about whether to raise the anonymity of the firearms officer. There are plans in place to mitigate any possible action by firearms officers. Those are the usual ones that were in place previously as well. I've had assurances from the Commissioner at that point that he was confident that he was confident that he had dealt with some of the issues that the firearms officers were concerned about, the review being one of those issues actually. So they are waiting for the outcome of the review as well. But two, that he had sufficient plans to mitigate, and that includes calling on mutual aid and includes, calling on the army if necessary, as he did for a couple of days previously.
Okay, one of my questions before, you said that there was a problem recruiting because of the diversity aspect. Since we just need officers, we wouldn't stop officers coming in because they weren't. Right. That's
of course not. It's just trying to make sure there's a pipeline.
I understand that, but I would hate that we were short of officers because we had to tick certain boxes. That would be absolutely awful. Okay, thank you for that assurance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Assemblymember Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions. I think the first one has probably been answered to some extent, but I'll still put it to you. So in terms of this culture of elitism and bringing more accountability to special firearms, apart from what you told us about changes in the training centre, and I think you said there are two people on the board. One is Caroline Downs, and you mentioned another named Deputy Mayor who's got some experience of cultural changes. Is there more that you can tell us about what's being done to break down this macho culture that Assemblymember Pigeon talked about?
So it was Susan Lee, who is the other board member, who has significant experience of cultural change. In terms of what else has been done within the Firearms Command, and also we had the Operation Linden review, which looked particularly into the Parliamentary and diplomatic protection, which is obviously also firearms, and a number of things are being done around that, around bringing in a change of leadership. You can see that about how the leadership of that unit and other firearms units has absolutely changed in the last 18 months in order to bring in a change, but also the numbers of officers who are moving, being moved around and out, not necessarily because of conduct or anything like that, but just to make sure that one of the issues that he's very, very clear about, Baroness Casey was clear about as well, is that that culture of people being there for a long time, the embedded culture and the need to change it a little bit, and that is happening. You can see that in the review that was published. I've got the figures if it would help. 1/3 of all PADP supervisors are new, and there's a third of them are new. So you can see that moving.
Yeah. I mean, I don't need to say this, but I think it goes without saying that these people do a job in very difficult and challenging circumstances. And echo what Assemblymember Hall said about certainly offering them support doesn't mean they don't need to be scrutinized. And it was quite good to see something on social media a few weeks ago. I think it was the Assistant Commissioner with a batch of women police officers who had actually volunteered to join the firearms unit. And accept that there is a determination to change this culture. So I don't think that was just a matter sort of promoting themselves.
Yeah, I mean, there has been a huge push to, and notwithstanding what you said, Susan, of course nobody would be turned away if they reach the right standard. Absolutely. But there has been a huge push, particularly in PADP, to get women into it. So that it's moved from August 22. There were 6% female officers. It's still got a long way to go, but it's 11.1% now. So there has been a huge increase in that. Yeah. And when I went to visit the Firearms Command recently, and again, the senior leadership of that had been changed, and there were a good proportion of that senior leadership were women.
Good. And one final question, Chair. Very quickly, Deputy Mayor, Behrens Casey suggested a complete revetting of specialist firearms. Is this being done? And what changes are being made to the process?
Yeah, they were first, they were prioritised, and it has been done.
It's been done. Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I am going to call a 10-minute adjournment so that people can have a comfort break, and then we'll move on to the second half of the meeting. And we are now resuming the Police and Crime Committee for this morning. So I am going to move to Assembly Member Hall, who is going to be asking some questions about the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command.
I am indeed. First of all, can you clarify me? I always say Operation Leven, and you called it Leven. It's like tomato, isn't it? Potato,
it's
potato.
Probably Leven because it's only what LEV, so I think I mispronounced.
Leven.
Probably.
Right, we've got it. Okay, thank you. So the question is, what is MOPAC's assessment of Operation Leven and the work the Met has undertaken to identify and address the issues in its Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command?
So both myself and Kenny have actually visited recently the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command to discuss with the OCU commander there Operation 11 before it was published, and we've had several meetings in the run-up to the publication. I think it's a good piece of work. I've already said at the committee this morning about some of the changes that have already happened as the review and the report was being developed. Of course, it's going to be the proof of the pudding is going to be in how big a change happens and whether they meet some of the deadlines and timetable that they have set out within that. And of course, we will be continuing to hold the Metropolitan Police to account for that. So it is a good piece of work. They've definitely made a huge effort to look at supervision, leadership, training, really look at this issue about the giving the cards and who gets through training and doesn't get through training. As we've discussed already, really looked at how they managed, the recruitment into firearms and into PAD-P. So it's a good piece of work, but we will continue to monitor to make sure that it has the impact that it has set out to have.
Okay, how do you check if misogyny and things like that are still going on? Because it would be going on inside a closed team. Do you know what I mean? You can overview things, but you can't know what you can't necessarily see. And it's a general question because I don't know the answer, and it's a really difficult one. So I appreciate the problems you've got. I mean, sometimes these comments, and let's face it, we're politicians, we know full well this happens, but I mean, sometimes these comments are a sort of a side comment or a throwaway comment, which isn't going to be written down anywhere, but it's just going on. How do you monitor whether that is still going on?
So there's obviously the staff survey, and that will be part of the indicators and should be able to give us a good understanding of not just morale, but what is actually how people feel. And when you look at the analytics of the staff survey, you can have a look at the demographics, the gender, the diversity, and what people are saying within that. Of course, it's also about supervision, isn't it? And to make sure that people are properly supervised. And the culture of the leadership as well, and that culture has changed in terms of not just new people coming in, but actually being there and being present and asking the right questions. And we will be monitoring that in terms of staff survey, but also in terms of turnover as well within PAD-P.
Yeah, it's a very difficult one. And these staff surveys, are they confidential? Are they so? Do people put their names on it even?
No. So there's two different surveys. So there's one which is the Met-wide survey, if you like, where you'll then be able to compare that against it. And we have now recently just run, for the third time, a survey into Firearms Command as a whole. Now, the results of that are just coming through, and we need to go and speak to the Met about it, etc. But if you look at 2017, for example, the results of that wouldn't necessarily have picked up anything in particular, that there was a negative culture per se within the PAD-P stuff. It would have said that they were a little less happy in training, a little less happy in other areas, and slightly more satisfied in other commands and others. I do think, in terms of what's important in this area, though, they've brought in 12 new sergeants, because I do think supervisory ratios and actually how you deal with this sort of stuff is really difficult, particularly when a lot of these people are on static commands for a long time and aren't going to be sort of interacting in quite the same way as other people. And when Sophie and I went to see them, they were talking through us about some of the leadership programmes which their new leaders, particularly at sergeant and inspector level, who really are the people who make the weather, is how I think about it. So doing all of that and they were actually giving them much better facilities. So we saw, we saw the dungeon, if I can call it like that, where they kind of had been and all crammed in, and it really was not conducive to a good working environment. And then they were creating a new place. So I think all of that will make a difference. In answer to your specific question about how can you ever be 100% sure, I just think the honest answer is on this sort of stuff, you can never be 100% sure, but do I feel assured that the right steps are being taken in line with what evidence would suggest is the right way of addressing this? I think that is happening as best we can see.
Good, because those of us that read that the conditions they were in squalid, rodent infestations, low ceilings. That would just finish your morale off completely, wouldn't it? And Casey identified that officers felt unhappy, unloved, and bored. Well, you can't blame them if they're, and they do stand around for ages, and it must be miserable for them in that respect. But so how have we changed that? I hear what you say about their accommodation, which is better, but is there anything that can be done about the fact that they don't feel valued, if you like, they're unhappy? And has anything been done about the boredom? Because when boredom sets in, we all know, don't we? If if you're sitting somewhere or standing somewhere without anything to to keep their minds occupied.
So I was just checking whether they changed the shifts, because when we discussed this with them, very much what you're talking about in terms that what Kenny's talked about and I've talked about supervision, that's really important, because actually one of the questions that I asked when we went was, well, what was the supervision, what is the supervision like? And the answer was that this is changing, because actually you could have people who were on shift who weren't being supervised by somebody who was on the shift as well. It was just being supervised by someone completely different. So we'd have no idea about what their working conditions are or what they had done on that shift. That has changed and is changing. Good. So that's super. It sounds dull and dry, but it's really important, because
I get it.
It is. That supervision is about value, isn't it? Yeah. It's about understanding what's happening, and it is also about picking up problems, because if you're there and you understand what's happening, you can do that. So there's a lot of weight being put on the supervision, and the supervisory ratio is making a difference. Obviously, we've got to make sure that has made the difference, and it's a good, that is the key question, isn't it? I think the things that are being put in place they sound like they're going to work. They are, sound like they're going in the right direction. The question is, are they? So there is what the London Policing Board will do as oversight, but of course also we are expecting in the second, 2 years on from the Casey review to have some form of look at, has this shifted enough? So again, that will be another opportunity, but we're not waiting for 2 years to see what impact it's had.
No, so when will we know if these particular officers, if you like, are happier? Because recruitment's very bad, we all know that. Retention is also a problem. So if you've got bored, unhappy, unloved members of staff, we need to ensure that that's changed as soon as we can.
I'll have to get back to you on when the next staff survey is. Obviously, morale is really important, but it's not just about morale, it's also about culture and what those officers...
No, I get that,
yeah.
But we've got to retain especially firearms officers.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right, thank you. I think that's covered that section. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are now going to move to our next section of questions, which is looking at child protection, and Assemblymember Pidgeon is going to lead the way.
Lovely, thank you very much. Right, so we had the accelerated causes of concern identified by HMI. So since those came out, what additional scrutiny oversight has MOPAC undertaken?
So they, as you know, I asked for that inspection because I was not happy, or I was concerned around the way in which progress and change was happening, particularly around the areas obviously that we inspected. We've also had the thematic, haven't we, around all forces and how well they are or not in identifying and tackling group-based abuse of children.
Yeah.
In terms of what we are doing, I have asked for a report before Christmas on how well the Met have progressed on the two areas of concern around missing and investigation. And then we obviously will have a meeting in January to deep dive into that. I've clearly also discussed the report with Assistant Commissioner Lisa Rolfe and also the Deputy Commissioner Lynn Owens because it was of such concern, and they both have absolutely accepted the findings of the report and we're taking action. There's been an action plan sent into the Home Office because that's one of the things you have to do, and obviously we've had a look at that as well. So I'm waiting for a progress report. It is quick, and the pressure is on. So it was October, wasn't it, that we had the two accelerated causes for concern. I'm waiting for a progress report on that.
Okay, this isn't new, and obviously I raised this at the plenary with the Commissioner and Mayor. This isn't new. We've been looking at this year after year after year. In 2016, the damning report. You then had, intensive oversight of this because I know you feel very passionately about this as well. Yet we get those two accelerated causes of concern. Obviously you're waiting to hear from them, though you have written to James Cleverly, I found it quite funny, Home Secretary, former colleague of ours on this committee, about this, which you wrote to him on the 29th of November. But what more are you planning to do once you receive from the Met details on this? What more are you going to do to make sure the response to missing children, how it investigates child sexual and criminal exploitation is strengthened, and that you have the assurance that things are going to change?
So we will continue the oversight in terms of, as I said, expecting a progress report. I've asked for one by the end of the year, before Christmas, really, and then I will have those discussions with the Metropolitan Police. But we are also very much making sure that the London Policing Board has this on its, not just on its radar, but that it will be, the issue around children, and in particular, this is on most likely to be, and we've yet to agree this with the London Policing Board, but it's most likely to be on the agenda for February.
Oh, right, because we've been told before it was going to be in December you'd be looking at child protection at the Policing Board. That's now February, is it?
Oh, sorry, I'm getting my committees and my boards mixed up. It'll be March, the Policing Board meeting.
So March Policing Board, okay, so that's slipped then.
Well, we did look at children. We touched on, well, not touched, there was, within the violence against women and girls, we looked at child first, but we didn't do any detail into child protection and this, because we thought it would be, having considered in the round what was happening, we thought it would be better to have not just the causes for concern, but some progress about, give the Met some time to make some progress, but also that we have not yet had the full report from HMIC FRS. We're expecting that in January or February of next year. And I think that's important for the board to have, so that they can actually think about, well, how is the Met, get some assurances about how the Met is going to tackle whatever is brought up within that. And I do expect that, to be a difficult report as well.
So that's, you're expecting that in January or February. Have you seen a draft yet?
No, we don't get to see drafts of the report. The force gets to fact-check a draft towards the end of the process of development.
Has that been sent to them yet? Are you aware?
It's with them at the moment. I've not had any feedback. I've spoken to the inspector because it's with them at the moment. We haven't had any feedback yet, but he is very clear that it's not going to be an easy report.
No,
it's
I don't imagine it is.
And that's why we commissioned it. So, yeah.
No, absolutely. And that's great you've commissioned it, and we're spotlighting on this area, and we're seeing once again huge problems. But I'm not hearing what you're going to do differently. You said, I'm going to continue the oversight. Well, you've been doing that oversight. I'm frustrated for you. For 7 years, you've been doing that oversight and nothing has changed. Or some things change, but other things get worse. What are you in any conversations with the Met about changing how they structure this area? Because they've devolved it all out. It doesn't seem to be working. Should they be centralising it again? What should they be doing to make sure children are kept safe in London?
So it's part of the work that they do on public protection, and there is a huge amount of work looking at how the public protection is delivered in the Met. It's part of the new Met for London plan. So those 500 officers are. So there is an issue about capacity as well as about capability and expertise, isn't there? Not we're looking at child protection now, but it is also around violence against women and girls. So that is part of the new Met for London. You mustn't forget that public protection unit is part of this work. Is where this work sits, and they have also been developing expertise in online abuse, and they're doing. It is a national problem about the case backlog on online child sexual abuse and the backlogs. The Met are doing their best to keep on top of it, but it is a national problem because of the demand that is coming in. So those conversations happen through the public protection unit, public protection conversations.
Yeah, but I don't think you're answering my question with respect. This is about. Let's focus on these two causes of concern, which HMI have flagged in advance of this, yet another probably damning report in the new year. This is around the handling of sexual and criminal exploitation of children, particularly around missing children, a number of recommendations, and those who are at risk or harmed by criminal or sexual exploitation. Since that came out, you said you're waiting for a response as an action plan. What have you seen that has changed in the last 2 months? Has there been any progress, or are you just waiting?
So I'm not waiting for a response. We've had the action plan. What I'm waiting for is a progress report as to what impact and what difference that action plan has made.
So you haven't got any assurance on that yet?
I've had assurance from the Deputy Commissioner about training of the investigators, which is one of the things that was within the causes for concern. In terms of structure, I'm not completely, the way in which New Met for London is looking at this is looking at it within the public protection and the development of that. But Kenny's been doing some work around this.
Yeah, so just in terms of the immediate structures within the Met and how we dock into that. So within the Met, the initial way that this is being handled around the two accelerated causes for concern is through a gold group chaired by Commander Sudworth, who is their, as you'll be aware, their lead in public protection. They've also got an a lead responsible officer for child exploitation to do that. I mean, the two, I suppose, key things with this is that people dealing with child exploitation are, by the end of the year, all going to have received training from specialist officers, subject matter experts on this, and they are introducing a central vulnerability hub in early 2024, which will have a sort of pool of specialist officers within that. So that is a structural change within the Met as to how that works. We are docked in. We sit through my head of Oversight on their Public Protection Board, which met for the last time in November, where obviously child protection was an issue, and we also sit on the Jigsaw Strategic Board, which is also looking at the issue of child sex offences. I'm in discussions at the moment with Assistant Commissioner Rolfe about how we get more detail than we currently do, but in a way which docks in with information which is doing with the Met, so that we don't create needless bureaucracy, extra duplication, etc., so that we can get that sort of additional assurance around that for the Deputy Mayor and all of that. So it'll be there has been a sort of grip within the Met. There is a different way of doing this coming forward, which will centre around the central vulnerability hubs, which also will deal with extra training. That will feed into the wider public protection reform agenda within the Met, which takes in wider issues around VOG and all the other issues there. And we will be getting more information in a sort of longer, over the longer term about this, which we'll then be able to use to feed some of our scrutiny and oversight.
Okay, so that is a slight change that they're making. But you've got to assure yourself that things are really happening, because you have been shining in a light, having, I think, virtually monthly meetings at one point on this, and yet here we are again. You talked about training of officers. Back in the November 2023, so last month's PCC meeting, Deputy Mayor, I asked you if you're aware how many officers have had specialist child abuse accreditation in terms of investigations. You're now saying by the end of the year. But back in the 2021 assessment, it said only 6 officers in the organisation had that accreditation. You know, how many have been accredited now? That was picked up in a previous inspection.
I think This is, I mean, it is very, very frustrating, and you're asking me what is MOPAC going to be doing differently. I genuinely think if we did not know what was happening on child protection and that we had not done the oversight, we should be thinking, and we still need to think about, are there things that we could do differently to drive through change in the Met? However, the oversight, and I think the oversight mechanisms, we have known what is wrong in the Met. We have tried to drive change, but it hasn't happened. We have invested in training. Operation Aegis, for example, was started down in Croydon and has been rolled out. We invested in it. It turned, I mean, actually, the inspector report, we invested it, but the inspector report said it didn't really show that it made much of a difference within one BCU that had it and one BCU that didn't. What I'm trying to have, I think it's an important discussion, is that a failure in oversight, or is it because our oversight, we knew what the problems were, we flagged them, we had HMIC telling us what the problem were, we had HMIC trying to drive change, but it didn't drive the change. Now, the issue for me is, why didn't it drive the change? And again, we come back to an overarching issue, which also comes out of what we've talked about previously, is how do you drive change in an organisation that isn't putting the capacity and the capability, and it's still too defensive? It is a real issue. Of course, are we thinking about our oversight of the next HMIC FRS report? How do we drive change? Do we need to do anything differently? Of course, I'll be thinking about that, because you cannot but think that if after 20, the number of years that we have been looking at this and putting significant capacity into it, it hasn't driven that change. Where is the issue there? We have now, the conversation I had with the Deputy Commissioner about these causes for concerns was significantly different to the conversations I had with previous leaders in the Met around HMIC FRS and their reports, which were much more along the lines of, we can't do everything, we can't prioritise everything, we're prioritising this, that and the other. The Deputy Commissioner, when she had these causes for concern, just said, I am glad you commissioned this report. We are going to have to get a grip of this.
Can I just add, I think one of the things, sorry, Ms. Pigeon, that you were asking about was why, what have we done differently? I mean, we've commissioned this report.
Yeah.
Which is a very different way of us doing oversight. Because
I guess it's kind of the nuclear button. You're just not getting anywhere. You're not getting the change. So commissioning this report, knowing it will be damning, actually, hopefully might give you, the tools, thank you, to then see the change needed. Is that how you're seeing it?
I would like not to have to commission inspection reports in the future, but I think we have put into our budget the ability to do that, because I think it is a useful tool. It brings more capacity into the oversight and scrutiny of the Met, and it brings different views and recommendations out. But yeah, it is one of those areas where, particularly for child protection, I felt that we needed we were not getting the change or the progress that was needed, and two, an inspection report would focus and sharpen minds. We did it also after the terrible murders by Stephen Port as well, in order to be able to, because needed that assurance that what we were being told in MOPAC was the case, and that there was going to be, that significant changes had taken place.
Yeah, I just, the policing board are going to be looking at this. I just don't understand what extra value they will add to this huge process that you've had trying to drive the change. Ultimately, the Met have got to change, and we can have all this oversight, but unless they get themselves in order and make the change, we can keep on calling for this and nothing will happen. And that's my frustration. If you haven't been able to achieve it, I really don't see what this policing board will add to it. But I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. No, I've actually got a follow-up question. Then we've got Assembly Member Bailey, Assembly Member Duval. I just want to check what read across you're doing from this area of the Met falling short in terms of missing children and child sexual and criminal exploitation to other interactions that the Met have with children, because over this last couple of years, we've seen awful revelations about the strip searching of children. We've had the child queue situation. We know that police are using force on children, and some children are being hospitalised. What read across are you doing to make sure that the safeguarding and the child protection within the Met, that all officers are aware of the need to treat children as children and to make sure that they are protected and kept safe.
I mean, that very much is the work that we're doing that I've touched on earlier around the Child First strategy, which is a commitment within the new Met for London. And it is about, it is about looking at the whole of the Met and every interaction and the ability of officers to look at children as children and think about how that changes the way that they interact and engage with them. It doesn't change the fact if they need to be arrested, they need to be arrested, because however, if that is the child first approach, and we are working with the Metropolitan Police around that strategy, and we're working not just from MOPAC but right across City Hall to bring in that expertise in supporting them and adding value to the work that they're doing.
And what are the milestones that you're expecting in terms of that stream of work?
Okay, well, sorry, it's like a university challenge.
Yeah, sorry. So this is actually being in MOPAC, in our non-siloed organisations. This is being led by my colleague Will Balakrishnan's area. But I think we're expecting this to come out early next year in terms of that. And also not just that the Met take a child first approach, but I think at the Criminal Justice Board we have managed to get the whole of the London system to sign up to a child first approach, because obviously there's no point in just the Met doing that when they operate in a wider system if the wider system isn't actually going to take that approach as well. So stuff will flow. I mean, and I think there's then a really interesting thing, because it's all fine having good words on a paper, isn't it? But what we'll then need to check is that sort of the transmission mechanism from the strategy into delivery is actually operating as it should be over the years that follow.
And what should we be looking out for in terms of understanding that the child first approach is being embedded properly? What are the outcomes you're going to be looking for?
So I'd need to come back to you on that specifically. That's and I can write to you with that. But I think it will be the sort of the training and the culture around that. It will be a lot about how children are treated, for example, when they go into custody. All of those sort of areas that we'll be having a focus on. I'm not sure it will be particularly quantitative issues more than qualitative issues that we'll have to look at.
And so how will those be qualitative issues? How do you determine those?
So that's something I'll need to come back to you on. So as I say, this has been particularly led by a different area of MOPAC. So I'm not trying to dodge the question.
Absolutely. No, we need the answer from the person who's able to give the answer, but it would be very helpful to understand exactly how to assess that. Assembly Member Bailey, you have a follow-up.
Thank you, Chair. Just two very quick points. Assembly Member Pigeon asked about how many extra officers are qualified in specialist child abuse accreditation. Do you have that figure?
Don't have that figure on me. I think we will come back to you on that.
I'm sure if you write to the Chair, she'll distribute that information. And secondly, this idea that the police are hospitalising children, do we have any kind of idea of the scale of that? Because the Chair made that comment, and obviously if you're watching this at home, that will sound horrific. Is that a large-scale thing, and are there mitigating circumstances, and is that information held separately so it can be scrutinised properly?
So the Red Thread have been in Lewisham and maybe a couple of other boroughs in South East London have been collating the number of incidents where young people have had to come to hospital because of interactions with the police, including dog bites. So it's not just police officers, it's also police dogs. They've been collating that. I don't know if I've got the figures. I think it's 38 incidents, but I can't remember what the timescale is. But that's in a particular part of London. And they've come to us to say, what is happening? What can we do about it? We have we have been working with the violence reduction unit here because it's red thread because of the youth workers in accident emergency units that have picked this up. We have asked the question, is this just in South East London or is this pan-London? And so we are asking our other commission services such as St Giles and Oasis whether they are picking this up as well. But on the cases that they have brought to us, we have taken that into the Met and asked the professional standards units to look at it to see what is happening. That's a piece of work and analysis that is happening at the moment. I'm waiting for the results of that, but that's a piece of work that is there to see whether each individual incident is, you can see what's happened in each individual incident, or are there some patterns in this? And we're waiting for that piece of work to come to conclusion.
And thank you, because of course we have to be fair to the police because there might be some mitigating circumstances.
Of course.
But my other piece is I'm really happy that you're doing that piece of work, but do you have the capacity? Because Red Thread is a very particular scheme. It seems like it would be better placed than most schemes to ask that question. And is everybody collecting the same information so that it can be compared?
So that's what we are working on at the moment, because Red Thread has done this because they're in some of the accident emergency units. St Giles are in other accident emergency units, and Oasis is in one or two as well. So we are working with the violence reduction unit to collate this information to understand what is happening. But also, there may not be, we've taken it to the professional standards. Obviously, they need to look at it. There may not be any misconduct in here, but there may be some learning and there may be some issues that can actually help, because obviously you need to try to avoid this as much as possible.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Could you just say when do you expect to have that report back?
I don't know the answer to that because we've had that discussion with them recently. Professional standards is under huge pressure at the moment, as you can imagine, so they are looking at what resources they can allocate to it. So I'll have to come back to you.
Okay, we'd appreciate that. Assembly Member Deval.
Just following up earlier on Assembly Member's pigeon issue, and in terms of your answers of where we got to in terms of potential change on the outcomes of the child protection issues, I think we should place on record our thanks to the work that you've done, but we have to really realise at this point in time it is one of failure. It is one of where we're failing to protect the most vulnerable with a consistent service, and you have tried, other professionals have tried to do something, and maybe it's time to think of something different. I go back to the times when the Metropolitan Police Services have been in crisis before on particular issues and their response to it, which makes me think that do we prioritise young people and child protection in the way that we did when we had a problem with murder investigations? Extra staff were brought in. We brought in we had a very relatively inexperienced policing staff, and we brought in some ex-staff back into the frame to try to improve some of those issues. Not forever and a day, but isn't this the case where we should be, and the inspectorate should be saying to us, let's try something different. Maybe, and again, not to take too much time, because I think there's a sense of urgency about this, we need a mixture of police and non-policing staff to bring this service and bring about the change that we need to make sure that we're all comfortable with it. But when the professionals don't seem to be offering that to you, and it does appear from the exchange earlier on and from everything we've received, we just keep coming across with more of the same. It's not working. And I just think I'd like to hear, is there other prescriptions that we can do rather than, and I'm not saying we're shrugging our shoulders because we don't care, because I think people do care about this particular service, but how do we achieve the change that we want? Because I don't think we can continue to be here in another couple of years or a year's time and still think this is okay, it's normalised. It almost has become normalised. There are bits, never mind the new issues of the inspectorate, it's about this service. So I'm thinking in the creative issue, shouldn't we be talking to government and saying, well, let's do something different with this service and pilot something in a different way and see if we can get the right outcome. But don't pilot it in just one part of London. We should actually go for a wholesale change with a different prescription for delivering this service. Still keep the policing element. I am pro-police, wanted police officers, think their role is important. But actually, I'm just looking at the nature of some of this work and the complexity of it. But actually, others can come to support and play a crime-fighting role in that. But I think we need to do something different, because if so, we are continuing to fail and let down young people with a very poor service, in my mind. And albeit people are trying very hard not to have a poor service, I recognise that. It's not, you know, around that. Everyone is trying to do their best, but the best isn't good enough.
No, and I understand why you're saying that. I think one of the things that we did do things differently in terms of, or push things to be differently. So, for example, Operation Aegis was a different way of training staff. It didn't have the impact that it should have. We wanted it to have. What I think, I genuinely mean this, is that I need to wait to have conversations with HMIC FRS when they are able to talk to me about what they have found and what they think is going on, because we need to understand whether it is the need for something radically different, or actually it's the need for better management, better grip, better supervision, all the things we understand that may be frustrating because they are the same themes, and they're the same things that DARA has looked at, the Audit and Risk Assurance have looked at right across the Met. They may well, and I suspect they are, may well see to actually be the same themes that are the problem in child protection and here that are problematic elsewhere in the Metropolitan Police as well. So I think that conversation is one that I would have with the inspector once they have finished, once they have really, you know, come to their conclusions, and they can tell me what they think is going on and why they think it's going on, and whether we really do need a radical change, or actually this is about all the other elements that we've been thinking about supervision training. And it does get frustrating because they're always the same. It's always the same thing. But if that's what works, that's what works. And also, I would say that nationally there is, one of the great frustrations for me when I did the oversight, when I was doing and still am doing the oversight, is that when you ask HMIC FRS or the College of Policing or anybody, okay, then tell me what is the magic element that will do this? Tell me who is doing it well. There was never an answer to that, and because of the complexity of this. I think there needs to be much more. My view is also that there needs to be much more interaction between the Directors of Children's Services and the safeguarding boards locally, as well as Pan London. And actually, that is happening. I chaired the London Criminal Justice Board yesterday, and we had Ben Byrne, who heads up the London Safeguarding Board, Oversight Board for London councils and all the Directors of Children's Services. We had him there because we wanted to talk about safeguarding of young people, children and gangs. So we are bringing in, and that is an expertise that needs to be more embedded and understood, and maybe it is an area that, as with other areas that we've talked about as well, bringing in that outside expertise is really important. So it's certainly something we need to look at.
Thank you. Very good to hear about that more joined up work with children's services and that sort of borough level with policing, because it is absolutely fundamental to trust and confidence. And this is a new generation of Londoners that we're talking about, young people and children, and if their interactions with the police in whatever circumstances are as awful as we're hearing, then that's not great in terms of rebuilding that trust and confidence. We're going to move on to our final section now, which Assembly Member Desai is going to lead on. We're looking at policing and protest.
Thank you, Chair. So, Deputy Mayor, to say that it's been a difficult autumn for the Met is an understatement, with all the marches that we've been seeing in London and nationally virtually every sort of weekend. So what lessons have been learned to date in regards to how the Met have policed these various demonstrations so far? What has MOPAC learned? I mean, how do you oversee the policing of the various marches? And I should say, I would rather be asking this question, well, not just of you, but of the Met, but they're not here. And this committee has always said that we are critical friends of the Met. So whoever from Scotland Yard is listening in, tuning into this debate, I'm sure someone is. This is a missed opportunity for them to come and not just sort of explain how they're working, but actually, we want to help and be constructive in our support. But sadly, they're not here, so it's over to you to answer questions on their behalf.
Well, I'm not answering questions on their behalf. I'm answering questions about what I say.
Of MOPAC.
On behalf of MOPAC.
On behalf of MOPAC. I would say, and I think we said this last time as well at the Police and Crime Committee, I think the Metropolitan Police have done a phenomenal job in policing the protests so far, and I really do think the pressure and burden on the Met is immense, and you cannot underestimate it. I mean, the Commissioner told the London Policing Board that 28,000 officer shifts have been completed in connection to the protests, and that includes 1,600 shifts by officers who've been brought in through mutual aid. I think that, not only are they doing a very good job in very difficult circumstances to balance the right of free, to protest and to free speech, but also to make sure there is no hate crime or there's no disorder. I think they're genuinely doing a good job, but also they're trying to balance how do they, as I talked about earlier, how do they make sure that the impact that it's having locally, and it is having an impact, is mitigated as much as possible. Conversations that I've had, and clearly, and I know we all know this, these are operational decisions for the Met about how they police the protests, and they are very good at policing those protests. But the conversations that I've had with the Metropolitan Police since October the 7th have been around how they communicate to communities, how they reassure communities, particularly the Jewish and Muslim communities where we've seen an increase in hate crime, but also, they brief. We don't have we're not intervening in the operational decision making, but they are telling us, what the way in which they are going to, they have policed and what they are finding, and some of the difficulties, or where they have learned that this is a good operation or a good tactic. I think one of the things that the Met have really developed over the course of the protests is their ability to communicate. They've had the ability to communicate to Londoners and in quick time, so that where there have been, on social media, for example, where there have been incidents of, really concerning incidents of placard waving or what is happening, they have been very quick to react, to be able to, one, to say whether actually it really happened there, not 5 years ago, and isn't a bit of disinformation or misinformation, but two, that they've got they themselves and the CPS are looking at this, that it's in hand. People, needn't be concerned that they've not spotted it. So I think that has been developed and has been learning. They've not always got it right. There have been occasions where they've got it wrong, but actually I think they've been quite bold and forward thinking about that.
So, and look, first accept it goes without saying that the Met have got a very challenging, got a very difficult job policing these protests. They're doing an excellent job, and the messaging to the communities, both by yourself and MOPAC, and the Met has been sort of very, very good. I've seen it myself in action. But about the practicalities of policing these marches. So, talking about hate crime, who's advising the police in understanding what types of behaviours and actions during a protest break the law? I think there's a group somewhere.
Well, they've had the CPS in the what does SOR stand for? Strategic Operation Room Strategic Operation Room in Lambeth. Yeah. They have had the CPS in them to advise them in real time as to whether certain incidents reach the threshold of criminal investigation. They also have experts within SOR at the time around what has been said about whether it does, constitute hate crime or not, and then they can talk to the CPS about it. I think they've got, a good operation in terms of, one, trying to spot what's going on, and we've got to be really clear that, especially when, some of the marches have been 50 to 100,000 people, it is very difficult to spot. And when I know there's been a lot of furore about why didn't the police see this, and when you see the CCTV, in the numbers, it is difficult in real time. But when they have spotted it in real time or after, they have that expertise within the Met about what has been said and the context, and then they have that real time advice from the CPS.
Are there also some community representatives?
They do have community representatives in the SOR. They invite people in to do that. They have an advisory group as well. So they are taking advice from all angles. And they are also, they are also reaching out all the time to communities.
And who no doubt have been checked and rechecked, because I think one of them had to be removed from the group. I'm just saying what has been reported in the media, a solicitor from Luton.
There has been, there has been somebody who they are now looking at their procedures around. Clearly there's many different advisory groups. They are looking at their procedures around who is advising them and why, but to make sure that it is within the bounds of the thresholds that you'd expect. But they are looking at that.
I mean, look, I know it's a difficult situation, and if these operational matters, you've got to take, sometimes arrests are made after the march. And I know that there are appeals all the time on social media trying to identify potential sort of offenders. But there have also been other instances where clearly there's been chants from various sort of small groups which are clearly sort of not just inflammatory but are anti-Semitic. I mean, what sort of training is being given to officers to handle these protests?
So they all get the briefing clearly beforehand, and they have the public order training, and actually the Met have also moved into crowds, haven't they, and taken people out where they've spotted the chanting, which does breach the thresholds and is anti-Semitic. I mean, there was, they have actually, I think it was in Trafalgar Square recently, they have moved into crowds to take people out and arrest them, and to make sure that they can't continue to do that as part of their public order training, that they do that.
Sure. So what sort of communications are being had with the march organizers to work together to dispel offensive banners which meet the requirement to be considered hate speech? I mean, I take the view that really it's the stewards who should be doing a lot of the work that the police actually eventually forced to do. Clearly, a lot of some of the placards, or fair few anyway, some of the stuff is just quite frankly not acceptable. And representatives of London's Jewish communities have actually expressed fears about Londoners being scared to go into central London on the day that these marches take place, which is just not acceptable.
So I meet regularly with the representative of London Jewish communities, and have also met Muslim leaders as well. Sure. And absolutely, they've said that to us as well, and they say it to the Met. In terms of, sorry, can you repeat the first question about?
What sort of communications take place with organisers about and training of stewards?
Yeah, so they have regular and good relationship with the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, and they have good relationship about where they're going to march, what they're going to do, and they have had discussions with them about the numbers of stewards, also discussions with them about, how they also understand what is happening within the march that they are stewarding. And of course, a couple of weeks ago, they produced a leaflet, didn't they? They produced a leaflet which really was about saying to those elements of their marches, these are the things that you need to be really careful about. I would really also caveat this. So this is a very small minority of people within the marches. The vast majority are there peacefully protesting and demonstrating about the crisis and wanting things to change.
Yeah, I take that point. I mean, I know many people from East London who go to these marches and who actually, I know them very well. I should also say, put on record, that there's also been a rise in Islamophobia, and just last week, and the police were commended for the actions by the East London Mosque, who received a credible bomb threat. The police were very quick to respond, and the mosque actually did put something out on social media thanking the police for their prompt response. So, yeah. Okay, I'll leave it to the chair.
Thank you. Yes, I just want to pick up on a bit more about the protests. And I would echo what's been said about the effective way that the Met has been policing protests since the 7th of October. It's been very interesting to see how their communications have shifted and the way that they've been managing these protests. Now, there is obviously the impact of the protests on abstractions from local policing and also on the Met's budget. Are you able to say anything about that?
Well, yeah, I think it really does throw into sharp relief, doesn't it, what the National International Capital Cities grant is about, because, whilst there have been protests in other parts of the country and other cities, and I've spoken to police and crime commissioners about it, it is nothing on the scale. With the capital city, clearly it's not going to be, it's a totally different scale, and it absolutely throws into sharp relief the underfunding of the National International Capital Cities grant. It was £159 million, that gap. The Met have estimated that if you take current, inflation and everything like that into account, it would be about £240 million gap at the moment. Now that's just for a steady state. However, we also have a problem that in order to qualify for a special grant, you have to have reached, which is to qualify for an additional funding from the Home Office for having to respond to unique circumstances such, I think, as these protests. You have to breach 1% of your budget. The Met rarely get to 1% of their budget, so it is because of the budget being so large. It may well get to over 1% because of the longevity of these protests, but that is a real issue for us. And the previous policing minister, and I presume the current policing minister is going to continue this, the Home Office used to waive that a bit for the Met because they understood that actually, whilst it was not a 101% threshold, actually it was significant, the costs that were having to be borne by the Met. The previous policing minister was very clear that he was going to actually be, use that as a technical threshold, and it was going to be implemented, and it's a problem for the Met. We haven't had any indication from the current policing minister that that is going to change, so it is a real problem.
So we're seeing, obviously this is a big issue for London, and we're seeing quite a lot of communications from the Met about the cost of policing protests. Interestingly, they've really focused recently on the Just Stop Oil protests with a tweet, "Read all about it, our response to Just Stop Oil." It cost us 20 million and 10,500 officer shifts to police Just Stop Oil. We'd rather use these resources in our communities. Now, I just wonder if you have a view on the way that they're picking out an environmental protest as against there's so many other protests that are also causing huge additional costs for the Metropolitan Police. And do you have a view on the way that the Met are picking out the environmental protests for particular scrutiny?
Okay. I'm just checking with Kenny because I'm trying to reel back through watching the Met's social media. I don't think they have only picked out Just Stop Oil in terms of costs and burden and pressure on their policing. In fact, actually, for example, in the policing board, in the Commission's report, the figures that I've given you are for the protests, the Palestinian protests and the Gaza protests. So I would have to go back and check that they have only done that because I don't think they have.
Okay, I'll trawl through their social media a bit further as well. But okay, we'll both check the detail. So the Commissioner has said that he believes there are some very practical provisions in the current public order powers that don't work very well. Do you agree with the Commissioner? And can you set out exactly what powers he's speaking about? And also how MOPAC is working with the Met and government on this?
Well, my very short answer to that is I think there's sufficient powers for the policing of protests at the moment, and that's my view. That I don't think the Commissioner has asked for any additional powers. Some of the powers may be difficult to use, but he's not been asking for additional powers. I think there's probably more than sufficient powers in the present bill, the present acts about what the police can and can't do.
Thank you. I have, I don't know which order you two put your hands up. Assembly Member Hall and then Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you, gentlemen. I was going to, before your last comments, Chair, say that I think that there's been a massive, massive change to communications in the Met. I've really noticed it. I wanted to commend you for it, and they're being far more proactive now, and I think that's good. As for being one-sided, stuff and nonsense, I look at your communication all the time because obviously I care passionately about policing, as I know you do, and because the difference is we've got demonstrations are one thing. Other things are when we've got a bunch of people putting orange paint all over things like Christmas trees that members of the public have spent hours putting up, and they want to damage paintings, stick themselves to things, and God knows what else. So if the police are actually commenting on that, good on them, because it's what the rest of the public think. We're all sick to death of the nonsenses of Just Stop Oil and the way they damage so many people's property, the amount of stress and damage they cause. So good on the police if they're commenting on it, because I absolutely agree with them. Very many of us, the majority I would hasten to add, are sick to death of the antics and of course the cost to the police of Just Stop Oil. And I feel very strongly, as you might have noticed, about this.
I can hear very strongly, Assembly Member Hall. Was there a question?
No, that was a statement, and I'm quite happy to repeat
well,
it
in which
if you
case
like.
I'll move straight on to Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you. Just to try and be helpful, I will form this in the frame of a question to the Deputy Mayor. Would you agree, Deputy Mayor, that the reason the Met commented on Just Stop Oil was because of the result of a freedom of information question that was put to them, and that's how it got into the press? And secondly, would you also agree, or did you know, that it was indeed the Mayor of London who blamed Just Stop Oil in an article in the Daily Mail? So I don't think it is the police that have been commenting on it. I think it is the they commented as a result of an FOI, and the only person blaming Just Stop Oil is indeed Sadiq Khan, who blames Just Stop Oil in the Daily Mail.
I'm not sure what he's blamed Just Stop Oil for. I don't know.
I
don't know the details of whether it's an FOI or not. The Metropolitan Police comments on protests and has given the information about the cost of all sorts of protests and will continue to do so. Possibly there has been a bit of a focus on Just Stop Oil because of some of the criminal damage that has happened. However, I think that if you look at what the Mayor of London says in terms of Just Stop Oil and those protests, is that yes, of course there's the right to protest, and of course, more than of course, though, we are facing a climate change crisis, and that we do need emergency action, but protests need to be lawful and peaceful and not disrupt the economic recovery and the economic development of London.
So you would agree they're not just single, as I agree, they're not singling out any one organisation, just there's lots of pressures on them?
I think the Metropolitan Police I think what they do extremely well is that they try to police without fear or favour and to communicate without fear or favour.
Is there anyone else who wants to... Assembly Member Desai, you had a question you wanted to raise at the end, but sorry, Assembly Member Devonish, and then Assembly Member Desai.
It's very brief, but it is a serious point I wanted to make to the Deputy Mayor. It seems that Just Stop Oil, and it's in the press reports today, are changing their tactics for basically being a nuisance to all of us, particularly targeting parliamentary candidates and MPs. And ironically, it's your party rather than mine they're saying they're going to target. I think that's pretty disgraceful that if they're going to start targeting individual democratic elected people and parliamentary candidates, will you make sure the Met give full resources to make sure that we stop these lunatics, frankly, and protect democratically elected people and those that wish to be?
Yeah. I haven't seen those press reports, but of course I think we have seen democratically elected officials, councillors, assembly members, MPs being targeted. I don't think that's right, and we know it's wrong because of the people that put themselves forward for public office need to be treated with respect. And of course, targeting. It depends what targeting means. You can lobby, of course, you can lobby, but anything that transgresses and crosses the line is not acceptable. And it's particularly interesting that it's often black members of in elected office and women members of office who get targeted, and it's a disgrace.
No, I think everyone would agree that making things personal is completely unacceptable. Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question I should have asked much earlier in the session, so I apologize for raising this issue now, and thank you, Chair, for allowing me to ask the question which I made you aware of. What's it about? It's going back to the London Police Advisory Board, as I would call it. So you gave us two sets of figures, £400,000, which is, I think, the budget allocated to the board, and a sum of 240,000, which I think, to quote, if you said, I think what you said, which is spent directly on the board. I mean, can you just
the overall figure is 0.4. Maybe that, I don't know what the figure was that you gave us.
And the sum of 240,000?
For 240 was for members.
Members, yeah.
60 for support, and it was a 400,000 envelope overall.
So my question is, and I ask this in a very neutral sort of manner, are the members remunerated, and if so, on what basis and how much?
20,000, isn't it? Yeah, I'm not sure. Yes, they are remunerated for, and they are expected to do a certain number of days.
How many days?
I think it's 20 days.
And what is the remuneration?
I'd have to get back to you. Is it 15? I think it was 15. It was. I mean, it was clearly advertised.
Yeah, I'm sure it is, yeah.
I think it was 15.
I asked this question in a very neutral manner.
I think it was 15,000 for up to 20 days' work.
And then we can.
And then we'll obviously, obviously, if it takes more, we'd have discussions.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of this morning's session. So I would like to thank our guests for attending this morning and for their answers to our questions. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion, note the monthly report received from MOPAC, and also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the meeting. Can I ask the committee to note its work programme for the 23-24 Assembly year? The next meeting of the committee is scheduled to take place on Wednesday, the 10th of January 2024 at 10 a.m. in the Chamber at City Hall. I have no urgent business, so that concludes today's meeting.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.